Not everyone who enters your life deserves a place in it. Some behaviors don't need your patience. They need your boundaries. Because every time you tolerate disrespect, manipulation, or betrayal, you teach people how to treat you. Stay until the end, because I'll show you the 7 behaviors you must never tolerate, and the wisdom to recognize them before they quietly destroy your peace, your confidence, and your life. And I want to hear from you. What country are you watching from, and which of these behaviors do you refuse to tolerate anymore? Comment your country and the behavior. This helps us understand our community, and your answer could give courage to someone watching silently. Let's get started. 1. Disrespect, disguised as humor or honesty. There is a kind of disrespect that does not arrive with anger. It arrives with a smile. It comes disguised as a joke. It hides behind the words, "I'm only being honest." And because there is no shouting, no obvious aggression, and sometimes even laughter around it, you may begin to question yourself. You think, maybe I am being too sensitive. Maybe you are not. Sometimes what looks like humor is simply disrespect wearing a mask. A person makes fun of your weakness in front of others. They embarrass you and then laugh. They criticize your appearance, your intelligence, your dreams, your mistakes, your relationships, or your abilities. And when you react, they say, "Relax. It was just a joke. You can't take anything. I'm only telling you the truth." But here is something important to understand. A joke is not harmless simply because the person laughing is the person who made it. The real question is not whether they call it a joke. The real question is what happens to your dignity when they say it. There is a difference between healthy humor and humiliation. Healthy humor brings people closer. Disrespect makes one person smaller, so another person can feel bigger. That difference is subtle, but it is powerful. A mature person can joke with you without needing to destroy you. A wise person can tell you an uncomfortable truth without enjoying your discomfort. Honesty does not require cruelty. Truth does not need humiliation. And someone who truly cares about your growth will not repeatedly attack your dignity and then use honesty as a shield against accountability. Think about this carefully. If someone tells you something difficult because they want to help you, there is usually a sense of respect behind their words. They may say, "I think you are making a mistake, and I want you to see it." That may hurt, but it is different from, "You always ruin everything. How can anyone take you seriously?" Both statements may contain criticism, but only one respects the person receiving it. This is why you must learn to look beyond the words. Look at the intention. Look at the pattern. Look at what happens after you tell them that their behavior hurt you. Because the response tells you more than the original insult. If someone accidentally crosses a line and you tell them, "That hurt me," a mature person can pause. They may say, "I didn't realize that. I'm sorry." They may change their behavior. That is accountability. But if someone repeatedly crosses the same line, laughs when you react, tells you that you are too sensitive, and then does it again, that is no longer a misunderstanding. It is a pattern. And patterns reveal character more clearly than promises. This is where many people lose themselves. They spend too much time trying to prove that they deserve respect. They explain, they defend, they argue, they give long speeches about why something hurt them. But you do not always need a courtroom to establish your boundary. Sometimes your boundary can be very simple. "I don't accept being spoken to like that." And then you watch what happens. Because your boundary is not really a demand that another person behave differently. Your boundary is a decision about what you will do when they do not. This is a major difference. You cannot control another person's mouth. You cannot control another person's manners. You cannot control whether someone respects you, but you can control how much access they have to you. That is where your power begins. Many people believe strength means fighting back. It does not. Sometimes strength means refusing to participate. Sometimes the strongest response is not a louder voice. It is a quieter life. You do not need to insult the person who insulted you. You do not need revenge. You do not need to prove that you are stronger. You simply recognize, this behavior does not belong in my life. And you create distance. This is not weakness, it is self-respect. There is another form of disguised disrespect that is even more dangerous. It is comparison. Someone constantly compares you to another person. Why can't you be more like them? Look how successful they are. They look better than you. They have more discipline than you. At first, you may believe they are motivating you, but repeated comparison slowly teaches your mind that your worth is always somewhere outside yourself. You begin chasing approval. You begin measuring your life through someone else's standards. And eventually, you forget a simple truth. Your value does not increase because someone praises you, and it does not decrease because someone mocks you. Your worth is not a public vote. It does not rise and fall according to somebody else's mood. This does not mean you should reject all criticism. Quite the opposite. A person who never accepts criticism cannot grow, but learn to separate correction from contempt. Correction says, you can do better. Contempt says, you are worthless. Correction focuses on behavior. Contempt attacks identity. Correction leaves you with a path forward. Contempt leaves you ashamed of existing. Now the difference, because if you cannot distinguish between them, you may reject people who genuinely want to help you while tolerating people who secretly enjoy breaking you down. And there is another psychological trap here. When disrespect happens repeatedly, you can become accustomed to it. The human mind adapts. What shocked you 6 months ago may become normal today. What you once considered unacceptable may slowly become just how they are. Be careful. Familiarity does not make harmful behavior healthy. A cage does not become freedom because you have lived inside it for a long time. This is why boundaries must sometimes feel uncomfortable. When you finally stop accepting behavior that you tolerated for years, people may accuse you of changing. They may say, you're different now. Perhaps you are, and maybe that is exactly the point. Growth often looks like becoming less available to what once consumed you. You do not need to become cold. You do not need to distrust everyone. You do not need to build walls around your heart. You simply need discernment. A compassionate person can still have boundaries. A forgiving person can still walk away. A peaceful person can still say no. And a kind person does not have to volunteer to be mistreated. Remember this. Kindness without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. If you constantly sacrifice your dignity to keep somebody else comfortable, ask yourself what kind of peace you are actually protecting. Because peace that requires you to betray yourself is not peace, it is suppression. And there is a deeper lesson. The way you allow others to treat you can eventually become the way you treat yourself. If you repeatedly accept humiliation, your mind may begin to believe that humiliation is normal. If you repeatedly ignore your own discomfort, you teach yourself that your feelings do not matter. If you constantly silence your own voice to avoid conflict, you slowly lose trust in yourself. That is why boundaries are not only about relationships. They are about your relationship with your own mind. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you build self-trust. Every time you recognize a harmful pattern and respond with clarity, you strengthen your character. Every time you choose dignity over approval, you become less dependent on the opinions of others. This is freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want. The deeper freedom is the ability to remain grounded even when somebody else is trying to pull you into chaos. So when someone hides disrespect behind humor, do not rush into anger. Pause. Observe, ask yourself, was this a mistake or is this a pattern? Did they take responsibility or did they blame me for reacting? Do I feel respected around this person or do I constantly feel smaller? Your emotions can provide information. Your discomfort can be a signal. But wisdom requires you to examine the signal rather than immediately obeying it. And if the pattern is clear, act with calmness. You do not have to punish them. You simply have to stop giving unlimited access to someone who repeatedly demonstrates that they do not know how to handle it. Because when you stop arguing with disrespect, you begin to see something much deeper. The problem is not always the insult. Sometimes the real danger is what the insult teaches you to believe about yourself. And once someone discovers that they can make you doubt your own worth, they may gain something far more powerful than your attention. They may gain control. And that leads us to a behavior that is even harder to recognize. 2. Manipulation that makes you doubt yourself. Manipulation is dangerous because it does not always look like control. Sometimes it looks like love. Sometimes it looks like concern. Sometimes it looks like guilt. Sometimes it sounds like, I only did that because I care about you. I wouldn't have acted this way if you hadn't made me. You're remembering it wrong. You are too emotional. Everyone agrees with me. You are the problem. And slowly, something begins to happen. You stop asking, what did they do? And you start asking, what is wrong with me? That shift is extremely important. Because manipulation often works by moving your attention away from another person's behavior and toward endless suspicion of yourself. You become trapped inside your own mind. You replay conversations, you question your memory. You wonder whether your reaction was justified. You apologize when you were the one who was hurt. You explain yourself again and again. And the more you explain, the more confused you become. This is why manipulation can be so exhausting. It does not always attack your body. It attacks your certainty. A manipulative person may not need to physically force you to do something if they can make you feel guilty enough, afraid enough, confused enough, or responsible enough. You may control yourself for them. Think about how powerful that is. They do not have to lock the door. You begin locking it yourself. This is why psychological awareness matters. One of the first signs of manipulation is when every conversation somehow ends with you apologizing, even when the original issue was something they did. You bring up a broken promise. Suddenly they remind you of something you did 3 months ago. You ask why they lied. Suddenly they accuse you of being suspicious. You say their words hurt you. Suddenly they become the victim. You express a boundary. Suddenly you are selfish. Notice the pattern. The subject keeps changing. The original behavior disappears. And you find yourself defending your character instead. This can create enormous confusion. Because now you are no longer discussing what happened. You are defending whether you are a good person. That is a completely different battlefield. And many intelligent, compassionate people become especially vulnerable here. Why? Because they are willing to reflect. They are willing to admit mistakes. They ask themselves, maybe I am wrong. That ability is healthy when it is balanced. But in the hands of manipulation, self-reflection can become self-destruction. There is a difference between humility and self-doubt. Humility says, I may be wrong. Let me examine this honestly. Manipulation creates, I must be wrong because they are angry with me. Those are not the same. You should always be willing to question your actions, but you should not automatically question your reality simply because someone disagrees with you. Let that sink in. Disagreement does not automatically mean you are wrong. Someone becoming angry does not automatically make your boundary unreasonable. Someone crying does not automatically make you guilty. Someone accusing you does not automatically make the accusation true. Your job is to examine facts, not to surrender to emotional pressure. This is where emotional maturity becomes powerful. Instead of reacting immediately, slow down, ask, what exactly happened? What was said? What did I actually do? What did they actually do? What changed when I expressed my boundary? What evidence do I have? This simple process can bring you back to reality because manipulation thrives in emotional fog. Clarity is its enemy. When you are calm, you can see patterns. When you are terrified of losing someone, you may accept things you would normally reject. When you desperately need someone's approval, you become vulnerable to their disapproval. When you are afraid of abandonment, guilt becomes a powerful weapon. This is why inner stability matters. The less dependent you are on another person's approval, the harder it becomes for them to control you through approval and rejection. A person who knows their own values is difficult to manipulate. Not impossible, but difficult. Because they have an internal reference point. They know, this is what I believe. This is what I experienced. This is what I will not accept. That does not make them stubborn. It makes them grounded. There is another important distinction. Not every disagreement is manipulation. Not every mistake is manipulation. Not every defensive reaction means someone is toxic. Human beings are imperfect. Sometimes people become defensive because they are embarrassed. Sometimes they speak poorly because they are afraid. Sometimes they genuinely misunderstand what happened. Wisdom does not mean labeling everyone. Wisdom means observing patterns. One bad moment does not define an entire person, but repeated behavior tells you something. If someone can listen, reflect, apologize, and change, there is room for repair. If someone repeatedly denies obvious behavior, reverses blame, attacks your character, and uses your emotions against you, you should pay attention. The pattern matters. And perhaps the most dangerous manipulation is when someone uses your kindness against you. They learn that you hate conflict, so they create conflict until you surrender. They learn that you feel guilty easily, so they make everything your responsibility. They learn that you forgive quickly, so they keep repeating the same behavior. They learn that you fear losing them, so they threaten to leave whenever you resist. At some point, you are no longer making choices freely. You are making choices to prevent their reaction. That is not a healthy relationship. A healthy relationship allows two people to have different feelings, different opinions, and different boundaries without one person needing to dominate the other. Love does not require obedience, respect does not require fear, and connection does not require you to abandon your judgment. If someone says, "If you really loved me, you would do this," be careful. Love is being turned into a weapon. If someone says, "After everything I have done for you, you owe me," be careful. Generosity is being converted into debt. If someone says, "If you leave, I will destroy myself," be careful. Your compassion is being placed under impossible responsibility. And if someone constantly makes you feel that you must choose between your dignity and keeping the relationship, understand what is happening. You are being asked to pay for connection with self-betrayal. That price is too high. You can care about someone without obeying them. You can understand someone's pain without accepting their harmful behavior. You can forgive someone without giving them unlimited access to you. And you can love someone while recognizing that distance is necessary. This is one of the hardest lessons in emotional maturity. Understanding someone does not obligate you to tolerate them. You can understand why a person became controlling. Perhaps they were hurt. Perhaps they are insecure. Perhaps they were never taught healthy communication. Perhaps they are afraid of losing you. These things may explain their behavior, but explanation is not permission. A wound may explain why someone hurts others. It does not make the hurting acceptable. This is where compassion needs wisdom. Without wisdom, compassion can become a doorway through which people repeatedly enter and take from you. You keep thinking, "They had a difficult childhood. They are under stress. They did not mean it. They will change." Maybe. But your life cannot be built entirely on potential. You must also observe reality. Who are they today? How do they behave when they are told no? How do they behave when they do not get what they want? How do they behave when they are wrong? How do they behave when you succeed? How do they behave when you become stronger? These moments reveal much more than someone's beautiful words. Anyone can promise. Character appears under pressure. And remember something else. Manipulation becomes much weaker when you stop trying to convince someone to understand you. You may spend hours explaining your feelings to a person who has already understood them. They simply do not want to accept them. That realization can save you enormous energy. Sometimes you think, "If I explain it one more time, they will finally understand." But perhaps they understand perfectly. Perhaps the issue is not comprehension. Perhaps the issue is respect. You do not need someone else's agreement for your boundary to exist. You do not need someone else's permission to walk away. And you do not need to win an argument to protect your peace. There is tremendous strength in saying, "I have heard what you said. I see the situation differently. I am not continuing this conversation." Then you stop. No dramatic speech, no revenge, no endless defense, just clarity. This is not about becoming emotionally detached from everyone. It is about becoming emotionally anchored within yourself. Because when you know who you are, manipulation becomes easier to recognize. You can hear guilt without automatically obeying it. You can hear criticism without automatically collapsing. You can hear anger without assuming you are guilty. You can hear rejection without believing you are worthless. That is inner freedom. And perhaps the greatest protection against manipulation is not learning hundreds of psychological tricks. It is building a relationship with yourself that is so honest that you can recognize when something inside you is being violated. Listen to the moments when your mind says, "This does not feel right." Do not blindly follow every emotion, but do not silence every emotion either. Investigate. Observe, think, return to the facts, return to your values, return to your dignity. Because the moment you stop needing another person to confirm your reality, they lose one of the strongest tools they could use against you. And that is where real strength begins. Not when you control another person, but when another person's approval, anger, guilt, or manipulation can no longer decide who you are. 3. Repeated betrayal without genuine accountability. There are moments in life when someone disappoints you. They forget something important. They make a poor decision. They hurt you without realizing the weight of their actions. This is part of being human. No person will move through life without making mistakes. So wisdom does not ask you to demand perfection from everyone around you. Wisdom asks you to learn the difference between a mistake and a pattern. A mistake can happen once, a pattern happens again and again. And the difference between the two is often not the size of the mistake. It is what happens afterward. A person who truly regrets what they have done does not only say, "Sorry." They become curious about the damage. They listen, they take responsibility, they ask what they can do differently. And most importantly, they change their behavior, because an apology without change is often only a temporary pause before the same behavior returns. Think about this. Someone breaks your trust. You tell them how deeply it affected you. They apologize. You forgive them. Then they do the same thing again. Another apology, another promise, another chance. Then again. At some point, you must stop asking, "How many times should I forgive?" and start asking, "What is this pattern teaching me?" Forgiveness is powerful, but forgiveness does not mean ignoring evidence. You can forgive someone and still decide that they no longer deserve the same level of access to your life. These two things can exist together. You can release anger without restoring trust. You can wish someone well without inviting them back into your inner world. You can understand why they failed you without pretending that they did not. This is where many people become confused. They believe that if they truly forgive someone, they must trust them exactly as before. No, trust is not a moral obligation. Trust is built through consistent behavior. If someone breaks a glass, saying "I'm sorry" does not magically make the glass whole. Words can acknowledge the damage. Only time and consistent action can rebuild what was broken. This is why you should pay attention to what happens after betrayal. Does the person become defensive? Do they blame circumstances? Do they blame you? Do they say you made them do it? Do they tell you to get over it? Do they become angry because you are still hurt? Or do they sit with the consequences of their actions? There is a huge difference. A person with accountability can say, "I did this. I understand why it hurt you. I cannot change what happened, but I can change what I do from now on." That is maturity. But someone without accountability may say, "Yes, I did it, but you pushed me to it. I only lied because I knew you would be angry. You should be grateful for everything else I have done. Why are you still talking about this?" Notice what is happening. The responsibility keeps moving away from them. They may acknowledge the event while avoiding responsibility for it. That is not accountability. That is explanation without ownership. And if you continue accepting this pattern, something dangerous can happen inside you. You begin lowering your standards to protect the relationship. The first betrayal feels unacceptable. The second becomes something you work through. The third becomes something you expect. Eventually, you are no longer surprised. You are simply disappointed. And this is one of the saddest transformations a person can experience. You become accustomed to being hurt by someone you once trusted. You begin adjusting yourself around their behavior. You stop asking them to respect your boundaries because you already know they will cross them. You stop sharing certain things because you know they will use them against you. You stop expecting honesty because you know you will receive excuses. You stop expecting consistency because inconsistency has become normal, and then you tell yourself, this is just how relationships are. No, that is how this relationship has become. Do not confuse familiarity with health. A painful pattern can become familiar without ever becoming healthy. This is why self-respect sometimes requires you to accept a difficult truth. You cannot build a trustworthy relationship with someone who refuses to take responsibility for the damage they repeatedly cause. You may love them. You may have history with them. You may remember beautiful moments together. You may know their good qualities. None of that changes the pattern. And this is important because people often defend harmful relationships by pointing toward the good moments. They are actually a good person. They helped me once. They can be very kind. I know they love me. Perhaps they do. Human beings are complicated. A person can have good qualities and still be unhealthy for you. You do not need to turn someone into a monster before you are allowed to create distance. This is a very important form of wisdom. You do not need hatred to leave, you need clarity. Sometimes the person you need to step away from is not evil. They are simply unable or unwilling to give you the kind of relationship you need. And accepting that can be painful, because the hardest relationships to leave are not always the terrible ones. Sometimes they are the relationships that contain just enough good to keep you hoping. You remember the good version of the person. You keep waiting for them to return. You tell yourself, maybe this time will be different. And sometimes it is different. For a few days, for a few weeks, then the old pattern returns. This creates a cycle: hurt, apology, hope, temporary change, relaxation, then hurt again. The cycle can become emotionally addictive because the good moments arrive after the pain. You become attached not only to the person, but to the hope of who they might become. But hope should never require you to ignore reality. There is nothing wrong with giving someone an opportunity to change. There is something dangerous about giving unlimited opportunities without requiring evidence of change. A second chance is meaningful because it is limited. If there are no consequences, repeated behavior becomes easier. This does not mean you should punish people. It means actions have consequences. If someone repeatedly breaks trust, perhaps they should have less access to your private life. If someone repeatedly lies, perhaps you stop relying on their promises. If someone repeatedly betrays confidence, perhaps you stop sharing your deepest thoughts with them. That is not revenge, that is discernment. You are simply allowing reality to determine the level of trust. Trust should have a structure. Small consistency earns small trust. Greater consistency earns deeper trust. Repeated betrayal reduces trust. This is natural. You do not have to force yourself to trust someone simply because they demand it. They must participate in rebuilding it. And rebuilding trust is not your responsibility alone. The person who damaged the trust must carry part of the weight. They must be patient with your caution. They must understand that their actions created the distance. They cannot demand that you heal according to their preferred schedule. That is another form of avoiding accountability. They say, I apologized. Why are you still upset? Because forgiveness and healing do not operate according to a stopwatch. But there is another side. Do not use past betrayal as an excuse to remain trapped in permanent suspicion. If someone genuinely changes, acknowledge the change. If they consistently demonstrate responsibility over time, allow trust to rebuild slowly. Wisdom is not blindly trusting. Wisdom is not blindly distrusting either. Wisdom observes. It gives reality enough time to reveal itself because words can be prepared. Behavior is harder to fake for long. Watch what someone does when there is nothing to gain. Watch how they behave when they are wrong. Watch how they treat people who cannot help them. Watch whether their promises survive inconvenience. Watch whether their kindness disappears when they become angry. These moments reveal character. And perhaps the most important person you must stop betraying is yourself. Every time you see a pattern and pretend not to see it, you betray your own awareness. Every time you know something is unhealthy but remain because you are afraid of being alone, you teach yourself that loneliness is worse than disrespect. Every time you repeatedly accept what destroys your peace because you hope another person will change, you place their potential above your own well-being. Do not do this. Your life is not a waiting room for someone else's transformation. You can encourage change. You can support growth. You can forgive. But you cannot live someone else's lesson for them. They must choose it. And if they do not choose it, you must choose for yourself. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop rescuing someone from the consequences of their own behavior. Let them experience the result. Let them learn. Let them grow or not. Your responsibility is not to control their evolution. Your responsibility is to protect the integrity of your own life. And when you understand this, another question becomes unavoidable. Because betrayal is not always dramatic. Sometimes the betrayal begins much earlier, with a small boundary that someone repeatedly refuses to respect. And that is where the next danger appears. 4. People who constantly violate your boundaries. A boundary is not a wall. A boundary is a clear understanding of where you end and another person begins. It tells people, this is what I accept. This is what I do not accept. This is what I am responsible for. And this is what belongs to you. Without boundaries, relationships become confusing. You start carrying emotions that are not yours, problems that are not yours, responsibilities that are not yours. And eventually, you may become exhausted from trying to keep everyone else comfortable. Many people were never taught how to set boundaries. They were taught to be polite, to help, to forgive, to avoid conflict, to say yes, to keep the peace. These can all be good qualities, but without boundaries, even good qualities can become destructive. Kindness without limits can become exhaustion. Generosity without wisdom can become exploitation. Patience without boundaries can become permission. And silence can sometimes teach people that their behavior has no consequence. A boundary begins with recognizing what makes you uncomfortable. Perhaps someone repeatedly calls you late at night even after you have asked them not to. Perhaps they constantly demand your time. Perhaps they read your private messages. Perhaps they make decisions for you. Perhaps they insult you when you disagree. Perhaps they expect immediate replies and become angry when you are unavailable. Perhaps they constantly pressure you to do things you have already said no to. The details may change, the principle remains. When someone repeatedly ignores a clear boundary, they are telling you something about how they view your autonomy, and you should listen. One of the most important words in any healthy relationship is no. Not because no is aggressive, because no tells us that two people can remain connected without one person owning the other. A healthy person may be disappointed by your no, but they can respect it. An unhealthy person may treat your no as an obstacle they need to overcome. They negotiate, they pressure, they guilt you, they become angry, they withdraw affection, they threaten consequences. They keep asking until you become tired enough to surrender. That is not respect, that is pressure. And if you repeatedly give in simply because someone reacts badly to your boundary, they learn something. They learn that your no does not actually mean no. It means keep pushing. That is why boundaries require consistency. You cannot control whether another person respects your boundary, but you can control whether you enforce the consequence. For example, instead of saying, "You must stop shouting at me," you can say, "If you shout at me, I will end the conversation and we can speak when we are calm." Notice the difference. The first statement tries to control their behavior. The second explains your own action. That is a powerful distinction. You are not saying, "I control you." You are saying, "Participation." This is the heart of a healthy boundary. You cannot force someone to respect your time, but you can stop making yourself available whenever they demand it. You cannot force someone to speak kindly, but you can end the conversation when they become insulting. You cannot force someone to respect your privacy, but you can reduce what you share with them. You cannot force someone to stop manipulating you, but you can stop entering endless arguments designed to make you defend yourself. Boundaries are choices, and choices become powerful when they are followed by action. This is why simply announcing boundaries is not enough. A boundary without action becomes a request, and a request repeated endlessly can become an invitation to negotiate. Think about a door. You can tell someone, "Please do not enter." But if you leave the door permanently open and never respond when they enter, your words lose their meaning. You do not need to build a fortress. You simply need to close the door when necessary. And sometimes people will become angry when you begin doing this. Do not automatically interpret their anger as proof that you are wrong. Sometimes people become angry because your boundary removes a privilege they had become comfortable with. If someone was used to having unlimited access to your time, your new boundary may feel like rejection. If someone was used to controlling decisions, your independence may feel threatening. If someone was used to you apologizing first, your silence may feel strange. This is why setting boundaries can temporarily create more conflict. But conflict does not always mean you made the wrong decision. Sometimes conflict is the noise created when an unhealthy pattern is interrupted. Remember that. A boundary may create tension before it creates peace. Do not abandon it simply because the first reaction is uncomfortable. At the same time, boundaries should not be used as weapons. You do not set boundaries to punish people. You set them to create clarity. There is a difference between "You are never allowed to speak to me again because you disappointed me," and "I am not comfortable continuing this conversation while we are insulting each other." We can talk when we are calm. One is punishment, the other is self-respect. This distinction matters because boundaries are most powerful when they come from calmness. If you set every boundary from anger, your boundaries may become threats. If you set them from clarity, they become principles. And principles are easier to maintain. Another common mistake is explaining boundaries too much. You may think you need a perfect argument before you are allowed to say no. You do not need a 10-minute explanation for why you cannot attend something. You do not need to prove that you are exhausted enough to rest. You do not need permission to protect your private life. Sometimes, "No, I can't," is enough sometimes. "That doesn't work for me," is enough sometimes. "I am not comfortable with that," is enough. The more you believe your own boundary, the less you need another person to approve it. And this leads to one of the deepest lessons about boundaries. A boundary is not really about controlling other people. It is about becoming trustworthy to yourself. If you say you will leave a conversation when someone becomes abusive, then leave. If you say you will stop lending money to someone who repeatedly refuses to repay you, stop. If you say you need time alone, take it. If you say you will not tolerate insults, do not remain in conversations filled with them. Every time you act according to your own boundary, you send a message inward. "I can trust myself." That message changes you. Self-respect is built through repeated evidence. You do not wake up one morning with perfect confidence. You build it, one decision at a time, one no at a time, one uncomfortable conversation at a time, one moment of choosing your values over approval at a time. And something beautiful happens. The more you respect yourself, the less you need others to validate your worth. You become calmer. You become less reactive. You stop chasing people who withdraw affection to control you. You stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided not to understand. You stop confusing being needed with being loved. And perhaps most importantly, you begin choosing relationships based on mutual respect rather than emotional dependency. But there is another danger here. Sometimes the person violating your boundaries is not openly aggressive. They may use guilt. They may say, "After all I have done for you, That's how you treat me. You have changed. I guess you don't care anymore. And suddenly, your boundary becomes a test of your love. This is where you must remember. Love and access are not the same thing. You can love someone and still limit their access to you. You can care about someone's feelings without allowing those feelings to dictate your decisions. You can respect another person's pain without sacrificing your own dignity. That is emotional maturity. Because if every boundary you set must be abandoned the moment someone becomes unhappy, then you do not actually have boundaries, you have temporary preferences. And people will learn to wait until you feel guilty enough to give in. Do not become cruel, become clear. There is a great difference. Cruelty says, I don't care what happens to you. Clarity says, I care, but I cannot continue participating in something that harms me. That is a much stronger position. And when you begin living this way, you may discover something surprising. Some people will respect you more, not because you became harder, but because you became clearer. Healthy people usually appreciate clear boundaries because they also need them. They know where they stand. They do not need to guess. They do not need to manipulate. They can disagree without destroying the relationship. They can hear no without turning it into war. They can accept distance without creating punishment. That is what emotional safety looks like. And if someone repeatedly makes your boundaries the enemy, pay attention. Because a person who cannot tolerate your boundaries may not actually want a relationship with you. They may want access to you. There is a difference. A relationship asks, how can we both exist with dignity? Control asks, how much of you can I get? Learn to recognize that difference. Your time matters, your attention matters, your energy matters, your privacy matters, your body, your choices, your values, and your future belong to you. Protecting them does not make you selfish, it makes you responsible. And once you understand this, something changes inside you. You stop seeing every goodbye as a loss. Sometimes distance is not rejection. Sometimes distance is protection. Sometimes saying no is not closing your heart. It is protecting the space where your heart can remain healthy. And sometimes the strongest act of love toward yourself is simply refusing to participate in the same cycle one more time. Because once a person learns that your boundaries can be broken without consequence, they will keep testing them. But when your words and actions become aligned, something becomes unmistakable. You become someone who cannot easily be pushed away from your own values. And that is where true inner strength begins. 5. Emotional control through fear, guilt, or silence control does not always look like control. Sometimes it looks like love. Sometimes it looks like concern. Sometimes it looks like disappointment. And sometimes it looks like silence. A person does not always need to tell you what to do in order to control you. They only need to make you afraid of what will happen if you do not do it. Think about that for a moment. If someone says, you must do this, you can recognize the pressure. But what if they never say it directly? What if they simply become cold whenever you disagree? What if they stop speaking to you? What if they threaten to leave? What if they become angry? What if they cry until you feel responsible? What if they remind you of everything they have ever done for you? What if they make you feel that saying no makes you a bad person? Now the control is harder to see because you are not being ordered. You are being emotionally trained. You begin learning which choices produce approval and which choices produce punishment. Eventually, you may stop asking, what do I actually want? And start asking, what do I need to do so they do not become angry? That is a dangerous shift, because when fear becomes the foundation of a relationship, freedom slowly disappears. You may still be physically free. You may still make your own decisions, but inside you are constantly calculating. What will they think? How will they react? Will they be disappointed? Will they stop loving me? Will they leave? Will there be another argument? And eventually, you begin making choices not from your values, but from your fear of consequences. This is emotional control. And one of the most powerful tools used in emotional control is guilt. Guilt can be useful when it helps you recognize that you have genuinely harmed someone. Healthy guilt says, I did something wrong, I should repair it. Unhealthy guilt says, I am responsible for your feelings, your happiness, your disappointment, and your life. Those are completely different things. If you hurt someone, take responsibility. If you make a mistake, apologize. If your behavior causes harm, make amends. But you are not responsible for keeping another adult emotionally satisfied at all times. You cannot live your life trying to prevent everyone from being disappointed in you. Because the moment you make another person's emotional comfort the highest priority, you give them enormous power over your decisions. They can control you simply by becoming unhappy. Think about how easily this can happen. You want to say no, they become disappointed. You feel guilty. You change your answer. They learn that disappointment works. Next time, they use it again. You want to spend time with someone else. They become cold. You feel guilty. You cancel your plans. They learn that withdrawal works. They become angry. You become afraid. You apologize even though you have done nothing wrong. They learn that anger works. Slowly, a pattern develops. They apply pressure. You surrender. The pressure disappears. Your brain learns. Surrender creates peace. And this is where the cycle becomes powerful. You may even believe you are choosing peace, but there is a difference between peace and the absence of conflict. Sometimes there is no conflict because one person has learned to stay silent. That is not peace. That is fear wearing the clothes of peace. Real peace allows disagreement. Real peace allows two people to say, I see this differently. Real peace allows boundaries. Real peace does not require one person to constantly surrender so the other person can remain comfortable. This is why you must pay attention to what happens when you disagree, not when everything is easy, when you say no. When you have a different opinion, when you choose something for yourself, when you become independent, when you stop doing what they expect. These moments reveal the true structure of a relationship. A healthy person may be disappointed. They may need time. They may express their feelings. But they do not make your freedom the price of their love. A controlling person often does. They may say, if you loved me, you would do this. That sentence sounds emotional. But look closely. It is not really asking for love. It is using love as leverage. The message underneath is, prove your love by obeying me. That is not love. That is control disguised as emotional necessity. Another common weapon is guilt through sacrifice. Someone repeatedly reminds you of everything they have done for you. I was there when nobody else was. I sacrificed everything for you. I gave you so much. And this is how you repay me. Gratitude is healthy. Debt created through emotional pressure is not. If someone gives to you only so they can later use it to control you, the gift was never completely free. This does not mean you should become ungrateful. Appreciate people. Honor genuine kindness. Return generosity when you can, but understand that healthy generosity does not create ownership. If I help you, it does not mean I own your future. If I love you, it does not mean I own your choices. If I support you, it does not mean you owe me obedience. This distinction is essential, because manipulation often takes something beautiful and twists it. Love becomes control. Concern becomes surveillance. Generosity becomes debt. Protection becomes restriction. Honesty becomes cruelty. Silence becomes punishment. And because the original thing was positive, the control becomes difficult to recognize. This is why intelligence alone is not enough. You need awareness. You need to look beneath the surface. Ask, what happens when I make a choice they do not like? That question can reveal more than 1,000 conversations. Because people show you who they are when they do not get what they want. Someone who respects you may disagree with your decision. Someone who wants control will try to change your decision by changing your emotional state. They make you afraid, they make you guilty, they make you ashamed, they make you uncertain. And once you are emotionally overwhelmed, you become easier to influence. So one of the most powerful things you can learn is this. Do not make important decisions. While someone is deliberately flooding you with emotion, pause, step away, breathe, think. You can say, "I need time to think about this." That simple sentence can interrupt a great deal of emotional pressure. You do not have to answer immediately. You do not have to defend yourself immediately. You do not have to solve someone else's emotional reaction immediately. Silence can be useful when it gives you space to think, but silence can also be used as a weapon, and this distinction matters. Healthy silence says, "I am overwhelmed. I need some time before I can speak clearly." Punishing silence says, "I will withdraw my affection until you surrender." The first protects emotional regulation, the second tries to create fear. They may look similar from the outside. The intention is different, and the effect is different. When silence is repeatedly used to punish you for having boundaries, it becomes a form of emotional conditioning. You learn, if I disagree, I lose connection. If I say no, I will be ignored. If I express my needs, I will be punished. Eventually, you stop expressing yourself, not because you no longer have needs, because you are afraid of the consequences. This is how a person can disappear inside a relationship while still remaining physically present. They become smaller, quitter, more careful. They monitor every word. They anticipate reactions. They stop sharing honest opinions. They start performing a version of themselves that keeps the relationship stable. But ask yourself, what kind of relationship requires you to disappear in order to survive? A healthy relationship should not require you to become invisible. And this is where self-respect becomes difficult. Because sometimes you must accept that another person's reaction is not your responsibility. They may be angry. Let them be angry. They may be disappointed. Let them be disappointed. They may disagree. Let them disagree. You can respond with kindness without surrendering your decision. This is a powerful emotional skill. You can say, "I understand that you are disappointed," without saying, "Therefore, I will change my decision." You can say, "I hear that you are angry," without saying, "Therefore, you are right." You can say, "I care about you," without saying, "Therefore, I will abandon myself." These distinctions create freedom. You do not have to fight someone's emotions. You simply do not have to become controlled by them. This is especially important for people who naturally care deeply about others. Sensitive and compassionate people can be very vulnerable to emotional control because they feel another person's pain strongly. They see someone upset and immediately think, "I need to fix this." But sometimes you are not responsible for fixing it. Sometimes the other person simply has to experience their own emotion. Disappointment is not an emergency. Someone being unhappy with your boundary is not automatically a crisis. Someone disagreeing with you is not proof that you have failed. Allowing people to have feelings without making those feelings your command. This is emotional maturity. And there is something else you must understand. Fear-based relationships often create an illusion of closeness. You may think, "We are so connected because they care about everything I do." But constant monitoring is not necessarily care. Jealousy is not automatically love. Possessiveness is not proof of devotion. Control is not protection. Sometimes what looks like intense love is actually intense fear of losing control. A person may say, "I just care about you." But if that care means you cannot have friends, cannot make decisions, cannot spend time alone, cannot dress how you want, cannot pursue your goals, or cannot disagree without punishment, then the relationship has moved beyond care. It has become restriction. Healthy love leaves room for individuality. Two people can be connected without becoming one person's possession. You can walk beside someone without becoming their prisoner. And this is why independence matters. The more dependent you are on one person for your identity, finances, social life, emotional stability, or sense of worth, the more difficult it becomes to resist control. This does not mean you should avoid depending on anyone. Human beings need one another. Connection is part of being human, but healthy dependence is different from total dependence. Keep your own mind, keep your values, keep relationships outside one person, keep the ability to make decisions. Keep a sense of who you are, because when your entire world depends on one person's approval, their approval becomes a form of power. And if they withdraw it, you may feel as though your entire world has collapsed. This is why inner stability is so important. Build a life that belongs to you, not a selfish life, a grounded life. Have interests, develop skills, take care of your responsibilities, maintain healthy friendships. Spend time alone, learn to enjoy your own company. Now what you believe, now what you will not compromise. Then connection becomes a choice rather than a desperate need. And people who are comfortable with themselves are harder to control through fear. They can hear, "Then I will leave," and respond. That is your decision. Not because they do not care. Because they understand that love cannot be held together through threats. They can hear, "You are selfish," and calmly think, "Perhaps you are disappointed, but I know why I made this decision." They can hear, "Everyone thinks you are wrong," and respond, "I will consider their perspective, but I will not surrender my judgment simply because I am outnumbered." That is inner strength. It is not loud. It does not need to prove itself. It simply stands. But there is a subtle danger here. Once you become aware of emotional manipulation, do not begin seeing manipulation everywhere. Not every disagreement is control. Not every emotional reaction is manipulation. People sometimes become upset. People sometimes communicate badly. People sometimes act from fear without intending to control anyone. Again, look for patterns. Ask whether the behavior is repeated. Ask whether there is accountability. Ask whether they respect your boundaries after you explain them. Ask whether the relationship becomes safer when you communicate honestly. A healthy relationship can survive uncomfortable conversations. An unhealthy one often requires silence to survive. That is an important test. Try expressing a reasonable boundary, then observe. Do they listen? Do they ask questions? Do they try to understand, or do they punish you for speaking? The response contains information. And if someone consistently uses fear, guilt, or silence to force you into choices you would not freely make, do not spend all your energy trying to convince them to understand. Sometimes the most powerful response is simply to stop participating in the pattern. You do not have to win, you have to become free. And freedom sometimes begins with one small sentence. I will not make this decision out of fear. Say it to yourself, not as a threat, as a reminder. I will not make this decision out of fear. Then wait, let the emotion settle. Let the pressure pass. Return to your values. Ask what you would choose if you were not afraid of their reaction. That question can reveal a great deal, because underneath fear, there may be a life you have been postponing, a boundary you have been afraid to set, a truth you have been afraid to speak, a relationship you have been afraid to leave, a dream you have been afraid to pursue. And sometimes, the greatest prison is not the person controlling you. It is the belief that you cannot survive without their approval. You can. You may suffer, you may grieve, you may feel lonely, you may question yourself. But discomfort is not the same as destruction. You can survive disappointment. You can survive rejection. You can survive someone being angry with you. And once you learn that, fear loses much of its power. You begin to understand something profound. You do not need everyone to be pleased with you in order to live a good life. Your task is not to keep everyone happy. Your task is to live according to what you know to be honest, responsible, and worthy. Sometimes that will disappoint people. Let it. Sometimes people will misunderstand you. Let them. Sometimes someone will call your boundary selfish. Remain clear. You are not here to control how others interpret your self-respect. You are here to practice it. And when you stop allowing fear, guilt, and silence to make your decisions, another transformation begins. You become less reactive. You stop chasing approval. You stop explaining every choice. You stop apologizing for having needs. You stop confusing discomfort with danger. And slowly, you discover that peace is not the absence of difficult emotions. Peace is the ability to remain yourself while difficult emotions move through you. You can feel guilt without obeying it. You can feel fear without surrendering to it. You can feel sadness without abandoning your boundaries. You can love someone without giving them control over your life. That is strength. not domination, not hardness, not revenge. Strength is remaining grounded when another person's emotions are trying to pull you away from yourself. And once you learn to stand there, another question becomes impossible to ignore. What happens when the relationship itself constantly drains the very peace you worked so hard to protect? Because sometimes the greatest warning is not one dramatic moment. It is how you feel every time you leave the person, and that feeling deserves your attention.